I'm Rick Munn. This is No Risk, No Reward Media. And this morning, I'm happy to be joined by Mr. John Waters, who is an Irish thinker. He's a talker and he's a writer. And this morning, we're going to have the unpleasant task of performing a postmortem on the Irish general election results that happened last week. John, welcome. How are you?
Hi, Eric. Thanks very much. I'm okay. I wasn't hugely surprised, to be honest, by the election. I think we had enough forewarning, given the European and local elections in June, and the general sense, anecdotally going around and picking up little bits and pieces. There was no awakening. I didn't feel there had been. I didn't expect one. I don't know. I mean, maybe I was a little bit surprised how similar this outcome was to the election in 2020, February, 5 years ago, almost a couple of months shorter to 5 years. Uh, Virtually the same result, and will result probably in the same government going back into office and continue. This is the most tyrannical, destructive, nasty government that we've had in independence. Probably the nastiest since the coming of the Gael government of the Civil War period. Probably, and I would say without do them, because those guys, at least, you have got to say in favor of people like Kevin O'Higgins, they had deep principles and they knew why they were doing things, and they believed they had to do the things they had, like executing Republicans, etc. at that time, sometimes quite arbitrarily. But these people now have no principles. They're just simply carrying out orders, and they don't care what they do in that process. And yet, the people who suffered that, whose families have been destroyed by death or injury, whose children have left to live in Canada or Australia, who watched their elderly people, maybe didn't watch them, maybe watched them through windows as they died alone in rooms. They have gone out and voted for the same creeps that did all this. Well, where do we start?
Well, there's a saying that the turkeys have voted for Christmas. And I think if there was ever an instance of that being illustrated, it's in these election results that we're seeing after Friday. You put a comment up on I think it was on Friday or maybe Saturday on your X or your Twitter page. I'm just going to read it out to you. It says, after the 5 years that we have put in since 2020 election, the circa 10% drop in the vote for independence shown in exit polls at the time is acutely underwhelming. Normalization by pseudo-reality was the biggest factor in the campaign, and it worked. There is no awakening, or at least if there is, it seems to be happening predominantly online or in certain echo chambers. And I know there are people, I can see more people taking to the streets in Ireland to protest certain things. And in certain areas, it's becoming more widespread and the numbers are growing. But the results from Friday, when you see these polling centres and you see Mayhole Martin being lifted on people's shoulders to rapturous applause, or Helen McEntee, who I believe is the biggest menace to the people of Ireland at the minute, or at least she has been as a so-called Justice Minister, her being re-elected again after her gross ineptitude and feelings to rapturous applause, my friend, it's hard not to be acutely underwhelmed.
Uh, exactly, and it's worse in the sense that, I mean, the people have suffered all of this, and I know they have. But they don't seem to be conscious of it. And it's a very strange phenomenon. It's like it is sadomasochistic in the sense that they are responding as if they deserve all punishment they got, and are now applauding their floggers.
It's Stockholm syndrome, is it not?
Yes.
You almost develop a bond. Stockholm syndrome, is a psychological term that if you're taken captive or taken hostage, for people that maybe aren't familiar with the term, you can develop some kind of weird bond with your captor, that they provide you with sustenance. They feed you every day. They put a roof over your head. They might throw you a blanket. They might give you a little biscuit on your birthday, but you're still a captive. and you're
That's
still
right.
under their control, but you develop this kind of weird bond with them. And almost sometimes when hostages are to be released, they're sad to see the back of their cat because they've become attached to them. Is that a case now? Should we rename it Dublin syndrome?
Well, yeah, like you see, I did another tweet I think yesterday where I talked about, again, kind of I suppose repeating the point, but saying that there may be mitigating circumstances, mitigating evidence, in the way at the end of a trial, you say, well, I was under the influence of drugs or whatever, and there is, in the sense that what the poor people of Ireland, like the people of other countries, have been living in for the last certainly 4.5 years, is a pseudo-reality. It's a constructed, fictional, mendacious reality, which bears no resemblance to what is actually going on at all in terms of content or meaning, in the sense that, and so therefore they because they believe what they're told, they think everything's fine, that this is normal. It's a normalization process. Whereby, if you actually watch, I found this in the election in June, and one of the reasons I didn't run in this election was because of how stitched up it was, the so-called set pieces of the election. Because first of all, as an independent candidate who doesn't agree with the government, you have no opportunity to access any media whatsoever, which in some respects is a blessing, to be honest, because they're so awful. But you just can't connect in those channels as you would be entitled to do in a proper democracy. And you're also, when there are set pieces in a debate, whether it's the farming community or the farming organization set up an event in a hotel and the big hall, and all the candidates that want to come along, and they all sit on the top table, or and they'll answer questions from allegedly from the audience, but of course not. They're all prepared by there's usually journalists there who are media moderating the event and so on. But what you realize very soon is that these are just kind of time wasters. They're filibustering sessions designed to stop you, to kind of force you into saying, what they want you to say, or else be exposed as somebody who has nothing to say or nothing to offer the particular community. So you can't go into an election now as a, say, complete outsider maverick who has a view of what is happening in the context that we've been just talking about and put that out there. You won't be allowed to do that. As soon as you get into the halfway down the first sentence, the next day one of the moderators will shoot in and say, no, stick to the topic. Yeah. How much money are you going to put into the pockets of farmers? That's the question, and that's the election. That's the process. So when people are, it's a form of hypnosis that if you're living in that place and you hear nothing else, then what you're hearing seems to be reality.
Yeah.
And therefore, it's not all that surprising when people kind of walk out in a kind of a trance and go in and do the same things that they did always. I saw this in relation to, say, the tweets of well-known personalities, like who have bought into this thing, talking about stuff that is, true, and it's happening, about the economy or whatever, or like the way that would be couched will be like, well, the government have failed to provide enough houses for those who need them. Mm-hmm. Yes, but why?
Yeah. Do you find thinking on what you're saying there? Also, you did run as an independent there, just during the summertime or just before the summertime. You actually did very, very well, given that you didn't have any media backing, you didn't have the backing of an established party. You did respectable numbers. However, the people, for example, and if I can use the name again, Helen McEntee, if you look at somebody like that with the appalling track record that she has, and little to no respect from anyone, a summary here is, despite a disastrous 4.5 years as Minister for Justice, Helen McEntee increased her share of first preference votes in Meath East from 7,691 in 2020 to 9,957 in 2024, an almost 30% increase in first preference votes. And then this person says, I'm telling you, there's something weird about this. Now, let's pause there for just a second. Is there something weird about it, or is it just simply a case of a beaten and broken down and mass hypnotized public? No, this is not a messed around result. This is actually this is legit, which is more disturbing and more frightening than if
Well,
it had been engineered and set up and somehow done on nefarious reasons.
well, yeah, that's a core question, Rick, and I can tell you what I would have some suspicions, but I can't prove them other
No.
than say what I said before, that the chain of custody relating to say, ballot boxes, boxes of votes being transported is not what it used to be, and that's in itself suspicious. The army, it's been brought in they've been brought by men in white vans now, whereas once it was an army escort. Like, now that's telling. But however, I don't know that, and I'm not necessary. And actually, my hunch is, even though I'm not ruling that possibility out, that the other factor is far more significant. That actually, when you create a pseudo-reality, people live within it and they accept its logic. And if they're getting the same thing from every direction and nothing else, like, you have conversations. And I'll give you an example. I mean, there was a guy I knew. Well, he's a very doctor, and a couple there last year. I was talking to him in a cafe, and he's a nice man, and I've known him for a long time, and he's smart, and he had a couple of the Irish Times with him, and I said to him, that paper is full of lies, and he said, "Oh, what do you mean?" And I said, "Well, they're not telling you what's really going on in the country." He says, "Well, what's going on?" So I started in a kind of a low-key way to try to describe things without kind of frightening the horses, just to test them out and take them on the road a bit. And he's looking at me baffled when I was telling him about, what had happened in the COVID thing, the scam nature of it, the various aspects of that. Then, as you said, the Ukraine war and various things. I can't recall the precise content, but it was to just give him a sketch of what we see as being the reality of life. And he's looking at me, and then he says, "You mean Brexit?" You see, because that was his only reference point in the pseudo-reality to any of the words I was using that he could connect it to. He didn't understand what I was getting at all, because it was non-existent for him.
Do you find that is in part also because this huge bubble exists, that the mainstream media, or the so-called legacy media, have had a vice-like grip on any narrative that goes out, okay? And anybody questioning that is deemed to be an alternative, or immediately labeled right-wing, extremist, fascist. Now even the N-word, the Nazi word, is being used for someone that has contrarian views to what the established mainstream views are. And is there an element too, John, where maybe a lot of people do realize what's going on, but for fear of being labeled and their peers pointing their fingers at them, they're cowering, and they're just simply nodding along like dogs? I mean, I just refuse to believe that sane, thinking adults with eyes in their head and ears attached to the side of their head, when they've seen what they've seen and they've heard what they've heard,
well,
how can you not accept the fact that that's bad?
Okay, Gerry, I think so, Rick. You see, like one figure that we haven't really, there is one figure in the ruins of this election that is different from 2020, and that is Sinn Féin's figure, which has fallen by something like 5% if you look closely at it, right? And that's significant. That's like 25% or 20% of their overall state in 2020. I mean, they should be another 5% up if in the normal course of events, and they would be almost on the point of being in government, certainly as a minority government. So they have collapsed, and there's no question about it. It seems to me that the reason is because of the immigration, what is called the immigration issue. Of course, first of all, we have to be very clear: it is not an immigration issue. That is not but it is a mass coercive imposition of aliens on communities. It is people trafficking. This is what people say. Oh, they're against anti-immigration. No, they're against criminality applied to what is called immigration. That's the point. But you see, this is the thing. It's one of those weird issues then that people, all these journaliers are crowing now that, oh, well, there's no anti-immigration vote and so on, and blah, blah. They mean exactly what I said. But you see, that's not right. because the Sinn Féin vote indicates that a significant number of people have noticed it. But the problem is that the voting box is their only place that they can express it. So even they don't get to speak it, and very reticent to say it in public, because you get into conversations now randomly with people. I was at a funeral last week and I talked to quite a few people, and you find the same thing. It's very hard when you know what's really going on to have conversations now, because people start trotting out the things you say. Oh, well, the far right, are making really big strides. I say, there is no far right in Ireland. And they look at me absolutely boggle-eyed. What? It says on RTE there is, so there must be, and the Irish Times says, and of course, this is all a con. This is the extraordinary thing, that when you actually know the truth and you lived in this country for, as I did, 69 years, you think people used to have a sense of irony. And if they were telling a lie or conning people, they would smirk in the middle of it. They would give themselves away. Now they do it totally deadpan.
Yeah.
And they keep repeating it and repeating it and repeating it, because that's their instructions. That's their meal ticket, Rick. That's how they eat.
In terms of, I suppose you would say, some positives, let's try and take a few positives away from what happened on Friday. Minister for Health, Stephen Donnelly, has lost his Dáil seat.
Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah.
So there you go. There's a little glimmer of hope.
What a creep he is. What a creep he is. Just one, hold there, Rick. What a creep he is, who came into politics in the guise of being, the guy on the white horse who was going to rescue the Irish people from bankers and all the rest of it, and is now the greatest creep of the whole lot.
Yeah, well, he's gone, so that's something. As well as that, just about everybody from the Green Party has also gone, with the exception of Roderick O'Gorman, who managed to hang on to his seat. I think he's going to be the sole representative now of the Greens.
That is cause for great sorrow, because he is the great. He is not. I lied. Donnelly is not the greatest creep, O'Gorman.
Well, someone put a comment up yesterday. Just a radio presenter put a comment up to say, I have to say, there's an amount of glee being expressed at the demise of the Green Party TDs and candidates in this election. It's distasteful, he says, and it is unedifying. Distasteful and unedifying to be glad to see the back of the Greens, who literally wafted in the first place in the back of certain sentiments, and now people are realizing the wheels are coming off that one, the gravy train, and there's only one of them left, which is in the shape and form of O'Gorman. Is it distasteful that they're gone?
No, but you see, Rick, we got to stop and think about that guy or person. I don't know who it was, male or female. But see, what that speaks more than anything else is bad journalism. That person is simply reflecting their own bias and prejudice, and that becomes the content of their statement. The statement has no content other than revealing the bias of the person speaking, and that's something completely new in the last few years, where people calling themselves journalists would go on and pontificate in that way without simply being invited as a commentator, which is entirely legitimate for somebody to. But for a presenter to do that, and you see, so if you said to that person, well, for the last 5 years, you've been slagging off the far right, and which is a little bit distasteful, if you don't mind me saying so, and a little bit unedifying, if you don't mind me, particularly in the sense that it doesn't exist, whereas the Green Party's demise, luckily and fortunately and happily, does exist. So what are you talking about? But they wouldn't be able to see the connection. This is the collapse of reason in our culture, in our political culture and our media culture, is one of the most, I think, terrifying aspects of modern Ireland now, and indeed other societies. But Ireland is particularly bad because we are so monolithic in so many ways. Our system of our media is monolithic. There is no alternative really, and the alternative media, insofar as there are bits and pieces, and you do your thing and I do my thing and we all do it. But there's no singular place where people can go to verify something. And this is the most important thing. In other words, the only way you could have any hope of sticking a pen in the pseudo-reality would be to have a place where people could go and look at a newspaper and pick it up and say, well, I mightn't like the look of this, but it's telling me there's something different here, so I'm going to read it for the sake of reading it. That's not there. And similar, there's no singular channel in a national channel or quasi-national channel that would a radio station even that you could go and know that what you're hearing is a mix of views, maybe. You'll hear the same old voices as you hear on the mainstream, but you'll also hear other voices. You don't hear those other voices. And this is the extraordinary thing, that these people who talk about things being unedifying are presiding over the greatest clampdown on free speech that has ever happened in a free Ireland. And they refuse to admit it. They refuse to allow, I mean, it's extraordinary. Like, they told people far right. They call me far right, for example. But they never mention where people might be able to find this far right content. You know, like, why not? If I'm so manifestly dangerous and incendiary and what's hateful in what I say, why not tell people, look, have a read of that guy's stuff. It's really terrible. No, because they know that when people go on and read what I write, they're going to actually start thinking about things. And that's the last thing they want.
Is this not also classic gaslighting again? You know, we've seen it from government over the last 4 to 5 years. We've seen it, and we're continuing to see it from the media. They accuse you of doing the things that they have been blatantly guilty of for years.
Oh, yes.
So to say that, John, if you gloat with a big smirk on your face, oh, Stephen Donnelly's going, that's distasteful and it's unedifying, and you can't gloat the fact that O'Gorman's the last green left in the doll. That's distasteful and it doesn't help anybody and it's unedifying. Is that not a masterclass in gaslighting? It just comes naturally to these folk at the minute. They accuse you of the things that they have been blatantly guilty of. And en masse.
Certainly, exactly right. I mean, look, if you're looking for a far right in Ireland, the only place it exists is the government. The government is the far right. The police and Garda Síochána, they are the far right. Drew Harris, I once wrote an article about this in a newspaper a couple of years ago, saying, who is the leader of the far right in Ireland? Drew Harris. He presides over the force which claims to be a police force, but is actually a goon squad acting on behalf of the World Economic Forum, by proxy through the Irish government, and calling itself a police force. But people, you see, this sounds, even as I say it, it sounds rhetorical. It's not, it's factual. If you would actually go and look, and if you listen, and if you pay attention, that's what you come to. This is the conclusion you come to. But you're right. I mean, so all you can do is respond in kind, really, and simply say, like I've started to taken now to calling the political parties variously, for example, the fascist Gaels, the fascist Fails, the Sinn fascists, the fascists before fashion, and so on. And it's a way of just winding them up in order to underline the fact that no. The people you're talking at and about are not the fascists. They're not the far righters. They're the ordinary voices of the ordinary people of Ireland. You are the fascists because you are using power to abuse and tyrannize the people of Ireland. You have no right to do it. Unfortunately, now they have an imprimatur in the form of an election, a stamp on their tyrannical program. And I'm very afraid to say that it's going to escalate from here on out.
There's a guy I want to bring up. In fact, I was going to bring this up, but you've just put a message out about him about an hour ago. So there was a certain element of circusry along this election too. This candidate appeared at the 11th hour out of nowhere, a very colourful character by the name of Gerry Hutch, aka the Monk, Gerry the Monk Hutch. He was at the RDS yesterday, and it looked like he had an entourage of about 300 security people. He had his own bouncers. He had the RDS staff in their high-vis jackets. He seemed to have the eyes and ears of the entire Irish media. And at one point, he was walking outside the RDS and he was asked the question, so Gerry, are you going to run again? And he smirked, and then he literally started to run he jogged at a fast pace, and they all tried to run after him, asking him the question. And I think he keeps himself reasonably fit, so he was able to keep up the pace. But these overweight sedentary journalists, they were wheezing and puffing and blowing and falling away one by one as the Monk ran off outside the RDS. So
That's brilliant.
let me just read what you said, and then I'm going to throw it over to you to give me your thoughts and opinions on this one, for example. So you said the rejection of the monk by the voters of Dublin Central might be deemed a reassertion of core Gaelic values, whereby, after due consideration of the merits of going professional, our democracy has renewed its commitment to amateur gangsterism. I feel very proud, don't you? So over to you, Mr. Waters. Gerry the
Well,
monk, where did he come from? Well, we know where he came from. Why at the 11th hour? Was it the Noble and Independent in Dublin Central? And will we ever
no,
see him again?
no, I don't buy that at all. I mean, I don't think that floats at all. I think uh, this is a kind of theatre, you know. It's a kind of piece of street theatre, and in the sense, it's kind of like quite welcome in my view. Because you know there is this tradition in Irish life, and it has been for some time, of these strange figures. I mean, of course, we remember behind this there's a whole, you know, world of criminality and violence and whatnot. But I remember, like, and I'm not in any way endorsing that, but you know, Martin Cahill, that scenario you describe, I didn't know about that, but it reminds me of what the general who was a predecessor of the Hutch, who was assassinated back about 20, 30 years ago. But for a long time, he used to dress up in Mickey Mouse T-shirts, and then he was being followed by the police, by the guards, and what he would do was he would drive around the Dublin mountains for hours, and his tail would be behind him, you know. And then he would run out of petrol, and he would get out of the car and take out a massive can of petrol from the boot and fill it up, smirking back at the boys in blue, you know, who were very very close to empty, you know. And he would drive a little further and then leave them behind and wave them goodbye. So there's an element there of that theatre, and you see that this is really interesting though, Rick, because in a certain sense, that is the kind of dissent that you can express in politics now. It is the only kind, in order to like just take the Mickey out of it, literally, which is Martin Cahill's meaning, and just give people at least a laugh, because those people in Dublin Central who voted for the Hutch knew that he wasn't going in to change the world. He was going in to make a point. If he got elected, it would be highly and hugely enjoyable for him and for them. But at the end of the day, it was a statement. And I think that's very interesting. But the thing about you say about this, the entourage, is very interesting too, because you know that's very, very important. Because I'll just say this much about my experience of running as a candidate, and it goes to the whole point about that the pseudo-reality and the general sense of, I don't know, ennui or something that has afflicted the people, that it also afflicted the resistance, the freedom movement, because you wouldn't have, as a candidate of any kind within the freedom movement, 300 people to come out and support you and stand with you at any point. That was one of the problems. Mm-hmm. On the contrary, there might be, you know, 30 or 40 people online stabbing you in the back at every opportunity from your own side. And I found that as well. So, you know, in a certain sense, you know, we need to look to ourselves and ask ourselves, you know, is the freedom movement really a freedom movement? Mm-hmm. Or is it just a bunch of bloggers online trying to build audiences?
On that point, because I want to, and also before I move on, you mentioned earlier on about media exposure. Okay, you mentioned about media exposure. So when you were running as an independent candidate, you know, you got the results you did with zero mainstream media exposure, with zero interviews on News Talk or RT or wherever it was. In contrast, there seemed to be a media circus in and around the monk. And again, I don't know anything about the guy. I'm just making the point to suppose that the guy has a shady past. He has a colorful history. Let's just say
sniff of sulfur. Yeah, that's right.
A sniff of sulfur. But that seems to be an aphrodisiac to the mainstream.
Oh well, it is.
It seems to be it attracts them. Is criminality the only way to really, apart from being a mainstream henchman or henchwoman? Do you have to be an extremist, a literal extremist now to get any kind of attention?
I honestly do. I think that one of the things that is happening is that by and large, that people who, it's part of a larger syndrome, that in Irish life, in the last couple of decades, it has been clear, because of the devolving of power upwards and the reduction of politicians basically to messenger boys, you don't get high caliber people or motivated people or passionate people into politics. You get cynics and grifters and all that kind of stuff, who will just stick up posters for a couple of years in order to get on the ticket. And I think that this has been a real problem in our movement now, in our kind of the resistance movement, that even people who have a chance are not being helped from within the movement. I mean, I would have run in the election if I hadn't had the experience I had in the Europeans in June. I would probably have run in my home constituency in Roscommon this time, where I had in the European election, I got actually 10% of the vote. That's a significant element of the vote. There's the makings of a seat in that, if I could replete that and add to it or whatever. But it wasn't worth it, because there was these people tailing me, and sticking their boots in whenever they could. And it seems to me, one of the things that I've found about it, Cliff, is actually one of the things they hate is exactly what we're doing now. It's talking articulately about what's happening, because they're not able to do it. And when they hear it, they immediately ambush it and try to reduce it in some way. I remember one night I was on a stream or one of those spaces on Twitter, and this guy rang in. I had said something about Solzhenitsyn, and this guy came in on one of the space, and he was sort of sneeringly, about Solzhenitsyn, that I was over the heads of the Irish people, and the people weren't interested in Solzhenitsyn and all this stuff, Well, I mean, I think Solzhenitsyn was a reasonably tall man, and he probably was over this guy's head for sure. But if that's the level that we're going to have to pitch to in order to be involved in this resistance, I don't want any part in it.
Yeah, let's look at the future, and I know we can't predict what the future will be, but credit where credit's due and respect where respect is due. There were a lot of people did put themselves forward as independent candidates. They busted their asses. They went door to door. They leafleted. They tried to get as much support as they could, and we did see some good results. Okay, but the question I have is this the beginning? I mean, there's an old saying that united we stand, divided we fall. Okay, it's a Bible. It goes back into the Bible. It applies as much today as it did however many thousand years ago. Where there's division, the house will fall. Where there's unity, the house will stand. Now, no one's ever going to agree about everything. You and I could we agree on a lot of things. We had a fantastic chat just even before we did this one, talking about music for half an hour. It was brilliant. But I'm sure if you and I sat long enough in each other's company, you'll say something and I'll disagree with it. We mightn't fall out about it, but we're not going to agree on everything. You're never going to get that utopian party that everybody's agreeing on everything. But there has to be some kind of compromise, and there has to be some kind of setting aside of egos, if egos are there, or schemes and ulterior motives, to form a united independent front, because there is enough people, I think, out there that are sick to the back teeth of what's going on. But the question is how to mobilize in a cohesive unit. Can it be done? Will it be done? And will it happen in 5 years' time, do you think?
I can't say that I'm confident that it will happen without some radical change or shift. And it's to do with what I've been just saying. It's got to do with the tenor and the configuration of the freedom movement. It is not attractive to the mainstream of Irish life. Even if they were alerted to some of the thing, even if there was a channel of communication, I think the movement would need to change and to adapt itself to Middle Ireland in some level, idealistically maybe, in a sense that is destroyed. That culture is to a high degree destroyed by corrupt media and so on, and by corrupt artistic subventions and whatnot, and basically by the purchasing of all voices within the culture. But if we are to draw people to us, we need to attract them on the basis that they recognize in us something of the personality of the country they would like to live in. And that's not there. It's just not there. This is a kind of an affected kind of talk about patriotism. You know, I don't use the word. I never describe myself as a patriot because I don't think it's a word that ever should be applied to the self. And nor I don't think should it even be applied in the lifetime of a person. It's something that posterity applies to somebody who has contributed something and achieved something. And yet that word is bandied around now by everybody. But the mainstream of Ireland doesn't buy into that. You know, you need blood, on your blouse, as Owen Harris used to say. Blood on the blouse. You need blood on the blouse. You know, you need blood on the blouse in order to claim to be a patriot. And you probably need to be dead. So I think that's one of the things that we need to start thinking about. How do we attract, really, and I mean that word attract in the most existential sense and metaphysical sense. How do we exude the kind of passion and truth-telling and articulacy, yes, about our state, about the meanings of things, about the future, about the vision we have? Yes. How do we do that? Because that's the only way we will expand the attractiveness of our movement in order to impress people that it is worth coming to us and listening to us rather than going down to the polling booth and voting the way they did the last time.
John, I think that's a good a point as any to end this particular discussion on, because it was a postmortem looking at the aftermath of this election, and without any shadow of a doubt, for many people that were unsuccessful in this particular election, they'll be going back to the drawing board. They'll maybe reevaluate their approach, maybe look at different strategies, different tactics. Some people may throw the hat in, maybe decide that it's not for them. That's fine. Whatever people decide to do is great. But without any shadow of a doubt, the next 5 years, I hope and believe that Ireland will see it through. It looks like it's going to be 5 years of the same old, if not worse. And at the end of that period, when the next election comes, let's just hope and believe and pray that there is a united, independent, alternate front that's in situ to have a viable chance at contesting in the next election. But whether or not that actually happens, very much remains to be seen. So, John, by the way, if you want to connect with John, he has a great Substack page. That's where I would recommend you go in the first instance. John Waters Unchained. The link for that will be in the description box underneath this video and also in a pinned comment underneath this video. He also has an X or Twitter page called John Waters Unchained. I'll also leave the link for that in there too. And I thank you very much for your time. It's always a blast talking with you, and hopefully people will take something away from this. A little bit of hope. Maybe I had a little bit of a chuckle when we were talking away, because humor is important, John, and you know what to say. If you don't laugh, you cry. So at least we had a bit of fun doing this as well. And thank you for your time, and no doubt we will talk.
Thank you, Rick. Much obliged. Thank you so much.
Later. That's John Waters. I'm Rick Munn. This is No Risk, No Reward Media, over and